Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of October. As you can see, it is Halloween. I thought that I would make use of looking spooky and film something, so wrap up makes sense because I'm probably not going to read in the next hour. So I'm going to go over what I read this month. A lot of the stuff that I read, I talk about in my vlog that is not up now, but will be up by the time this comes up. So you can check that out for a lot of these. This month I participated in the Latinxathon and Latinx Book Bingo. I also participated in ReadoRama, and I participated some in Tome Topple. I did not finish my tome, but I read some of a tome. So I'll talk about that at the very end since I did not finish. But is that a surprise? I've never read a whole tome during Tome Topple. I finished a tome during Tome Topple. Never read it from start to finish because reading long books is hard, which is the whole point of the readathon. On to the books that I did finish reading. Technically last month, I think, I read Gustavo the Shy Ghost. I didn't talk about it last month because I forgot to log it. I don't actually know if I read it last month or at the very beginning of this month. Honestly, it doesn't really matter that much, but I did read it. It was super cute. It's a kid's picture book about a little guy who's too shy to make friends, and then he finally invites them all to watch him play music, I think. I don't know. It's super cute. I read it for work, and I'm glad that I did. So, good and spooky. The next book that I finished is Iron Widow, and I fucking love this book. I actually picked it up. I borrowed it from work, and I had to buy my own copy because I just knew that I needed to reread this. And I even put some little tabs in it, which I don't do super often for fiction. But this was fucking excellent. The whole premise of this, this is set in a world where they have mech robots that are fighting these aliens. The way that the mech robots work, you have one person, the man, who is the pilot, and one person, or another person, the concubine pilot, is a woman. Concubine pilots very often die in war, so they're basically used as a battery for these mechs. And our main character, Xiran, is going to join the army and become a concubine pilot. However, this is because that's what her sister did, and her sister was murdered by one of the pilots, so she is going specifically to get revenge. So she's gonna go murder this man. And the plot moves very quickly, and it's a lot. It's very fast paced. It's excellent. And there are a lot of things that I really loved about this. First of all, there's a legitimate love triangle. Like, there is a triad that happens romantically, and that was just absolutely everything. The way that this was written, the way that that specifically was written, where you can see, even though this is from Zetian's perspective, you can see each corner of that triangle coming up, or I guess not corner, but each of the lines coming up independently of each other, and you can see how they work individually as well as how they all three work together, and like literally could not have asked for anything better. Though I will say, if anybody has fanfic from either of the other folks' perspective, link that to me on Instagram or something, because I am in dire need and AO3 has nothing. I really loved that. I really loved the nuances in some of the characters. Obviously, the main character is the one that I can focus on because anyone else really talking about them would be a spoiler. The way that, she comes in full force, nothing but fucking rage, And that continues. A lot of the times with stuff like that, they learn a lesson to be like less aggressive, or they go about stuff a different way. That absolutely does not happen. Her anger gets redirected and becomes less self-destructive, but her rage is never tampered, and it's so just palpable. That's incredible. I also think that the way that trauma is handled in this, and like the character dealing with it, there's one scene in particular, probably a couple, but one that sticks out. I can't even put my finger on exactly why, but even though the scene wasn't one where something is happening, she is reacting in a way that comes from trauma. And the way that was written, again, I felt it. So this is very well done. I do think that the last quarter, maybe less than a quarter of the book, is a bit rushed. But honestly, while I was reading it, that's not something that I really thought of that much until afterwards. Like, it didn't really take me out of the story because I wanted to know what was happening. And I can't wait for book 2. I cannot wait. This was excellent. I highly recommend it. Next, I flew through some short books. From here, a lot of these, this is going to be the first book that I talk about on the vlog that I mentioned. That's The Life of Melody, which is a cute little graphic novel about a fairy and a beast who find the same baby in a forest. Neither of them want to give the baby up. So logically, they raise the baby together, even though they really hate each other. So it's rivals or enemies, really, to lovers, co-parenting, fake marriage, absolutely yes. I adored this. I only wish that it was longer. I would absolutely read scenes and scenes of, the domestic shit, which is also how I thought about Iron Widow. That's why I want perspective from the other people. Although with that, it was, murder and then domestic bliss. This is just the domestic stuff, so whatever. Anyways, this was very good. I will say that there are a couple of scenes where they physically fight, and it makes sense just because of, they're magical creatures. This guy's a beast. He's eaten, his kind can eat people. So, it kind of makes sense they would get in a tussle, but I know that, if you're going in for, a sweet read and that's something that's triggering, that's just something to know about so that it doesn't kind of surprise you. There is a bit of a plot that develops, but I don't want to say too much, outside of this. Or, not outside of it. It's related to it. There is another piece of the plot that is in here that is quite interesting, that gives it a little bit more layers than just this, these few tropes all put together, but I feel like talking about that too much would be spoilery, so this is very cute. I loved it. I think this counted towards the Latinxathon. Yes, because Mary Costa is Brazilian, and this is a short work. We could call it something spooky because it's autumnal, and, I would say that it's also cozy. Gay graphic novels are one of my favorite genres. And the cover is very seasonal. I think that a decent chunk of this actually takes place in winter. It does go through some seasons, but the cover's autumnal. So we'll go for it. This kind of hit every prompt, even though it's one book. So far as Latinx book bingo goes, this has the name on a title. It is a favorite genre. It has queer representation by a Latinx author. So this is very cute. Highly recommend. Afterwards, I got into volumes 6 and 7 of The Girl from the Other Side. This is a really great series. I've talked about it periodically because I'm reading through it, and I just bought the last 3 volumes. So I'll probably read those next month. Haven't totally thought through my TBR, though there's a chance I will make that and film it tonight. But anyways, this is very good. I'm not going to talk about what happens specifically in these volumes because we're so far along in the whole thing. But the whole premise of this series is that there is this little girl who was left behind in her village. A curse is kind of happening throughout a lot of people. And the people in her village were fleeing from this curse. And she gets basically taken in by this dude right here who is actually what he's actually supposed to be a lot of the kind of bad guys, or at least to people they're perceived as bad guys. However, he doesn't really think like the other ones, so he takes care of her. So it's very wholesome. There are a lot of, like, it's not like intense horror, like blood or anything, but like the suspense and the creepiness that mixed with the wholesomeness of these two. And it's just a really wonderful series. I adore it. I'm sad that it's going to end. I'm a little afraid of how it's going to end, but we'll see. After that, I finished one of my nonfiction reads from that I started last month, and that is Discourse on Colonialism. I, again, talked about this in my vlog, so you can look at that for more detail. But this was very good. I definitely recommend it. It's really short. I read, like, when I read the introduction, I was kind of tired, but I read the rest of it just all in one sitting. And it's written in a really accessible way. I did get a little bit lost with, like, the names of people and some little, like, philosophy bits. But overall, like, the bulk of what he's saying here is really straightforward. This is basically a very critical look, more like a damning analysis of capitalism. This was written in 1955 by a black man in France. So, this was, you know, at this point we'd, like, talk about, you know, capitalism, like, pretty much wherever, but this would have been really big. To give you just a little bit of this, I'll read a quote from it. In the vlog, I read the first line, so you can see that. This excerpt can be found on page 41, and for context, they're talking about the colonization of Africa and specific atrocities that happened during that. They prove that colonization dehumanizes even the most civilized man. That colonial activity, colonial enterprise, colonial conquest, which is based on contempt for the native and justified by that contempt, inevitably tends to change him who undertakes it. That the colonizer who, in order to ease his conscience, gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself to treating him like an animal, and tends objectively to transform himself into an animal. So, that's Discourse on Colonialism. You can, like I said, see me talk about a little bit more about it in the vlog if you want a little bit more point by point. I highly recommend it. It did not take me very long to read it all. And it's going to be really great. I plan on reading through at least a couple of Frantz Fanon's works, and he taught Fanon. So, there is that. After I read that, I went back to graphic novels for a little bit. We have Boys Run the Riot, Volume 3. I read the first 2 volumes last month. I really enjoyed this one. I can't really say too much about, like, what specifically happens in it, but I will say that this is very good, and I can't wait for Volume 4. After that, I read something that's a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of stuff that I usually read, I guess. But I picked up a book on crystals. Understanding crystals. It was a book. It talked about a couple of different perspectives on crystals, has some information about some of them. I don't have a lot of thoughts or opinions on it because I am a very newbie to this stuff. But it was a book. I read it and it was interesting. It's insightful to look into different people's relationships with these different spiritual practices. I ran out of room and did not know until I spent an additional 10 minutes filming. So that's a lot of fun. It's a couple hours later, but we're going to go through these. The next books that I read were comics, individual issues of comics. I read issues 1 through 3 of BB Free by Gabby Rivera and Royal Dunlap, I think. Those were really interesting. I really enjoy the concept behind them. The whole idea is that there is my phone just fell off of the fixture that I had set it on, so that's a lot of fun. That's what happens when you try to plug in your phone and film at the same time. Or maybe just what happens when all your shit is broken. Anyways, but BB Free is a story that takes place after a really big virus wipes out the 1%, basically. That wipes out a bunch of the rich people. A lot of stuff has happened with climate change that's kind of just altered the world a whole lot. Our main character is trying to go on a journey. Whenever people turn 15, they're supposed to go and travel around. They want to do that. Their dad does not want them to. Their dad is a jerk and possibly a closet capitalist. It's really interesting. I like the concept. There's a lot of diversity as well. I think all of the characters are people of color. And the main character is gender fluid. Their best friend uses it's not quite a wheelchair because it's slightly different technology, but uses an accessibility device. The first 3 volumes, it was good, but I felt like it could have been more. Part of that's probably because it's an unfinished project. So if they had been able to continue, I probably would have gotten, they probably would have been able to do more with it. But it was pretty okay. I like the concept, would have liked to see more. Then after that, I read The Gentrification of the Mind by Sarah Schulman. And I really liked this. I think that everyone should read it if you have any sort of interest in gay politics and gay history and gay activism, LGBT stuff in general. You should be reading this and you should be learning about the AIDS epidemic because they absolutely do not teach that in schools. And if they do, it's whatever bare minimum standard there is. This book is part memoir, part analysis. She is talking about the way that AIDS has been remembered, or how it has not been remembered properly by the public at large, and why that is. She talks about the role that literal just gentrification played, and how that gentrification was tied into the gentrification of ideas around this time. So when people would die, and if they were the person whose name was on the lease, their shit was put in the streets, their partner was kicked out, there was no kind of anything for them, and then they would rent out to a person who would pay double the price, and then that would start the process of gentrification. Now, along with this, looking at New York in particular, Sarah Schulman talks about this happening and new artists who are not familiar with the area coming in. They don't have a grasp on the history of the place, and they're coming in and making art that they can sell. So art that does not challenge people. So this is kind of leaving all of the artists who just died out of the circulation of ideas. that are happening at large in this area. She also talks about the gentrification of grief. That really struck me. I went through and read a whole passage of this when I didn't know that my phone had stopped absorbing what I was doing. And it's the same piece of it that I read during the vlog, so if you want to know more about this, definitely check that out, because I read a couple of sections from it. But when they're talking about the gentrification of grief, they're basically talking about the fact that there are certain people who are allowed to be grieved, and in fact the grieving is encouraged. She specifically points out 9/11. There is a lot of discussion about that. There are a lot of memorials, etc. Whereas with the AIDS epidemic, even though there were just an exponential number of people who died from it, they don't get that same grace whatsoever. Their deaths are swept under the rug. They're ignored, and they're not really acknowledged widely. I just said that I wasn't going to read a passage, but I think I am actually going to read kind of the end of that passage to sort of sum up what she says when bringing in this comparison of AIDS in New York and 9/11 deaths. On page 47, she said, the tail end of 46 and into 47, she says, "It is the centerpiece of supremacy ideology, the idea that one person's life is more important than another's, that one person deserves rights that another does not deserve, that one person deserves representation that the other cannot be allowed to access, that one person's death is negligible if he or she was poor, a person of color, a homosexual living in a state of oppositional sexual disobedience, while another death matters because that person was a traitor, cop, or office worker presumed to be performing the job of capital." So that gives you kind of the gist. I can't overstate the importance of learning and understanding about the AIDS epidemic. I will say that since this is coming more from her personal perspective, I kind of wish that it had been a little bit more expansive. Like, I understand why it's not, but it would have been nice to see the fact that this gentrification of ideas and gentrification of grieving happens for a lot of minority groups. And it would be nice to see somebody flesh that out more in the framework. And I also would have liked a concrete connection to colonization as well, especially because gentrification is, it comes directly from colonization. So that seemed like Miss Ma'am, what are you doing? That seemed like a really important piece that was missing to me. What are you trying to do? So, there was that. And then the final book that I finished was my buddy read of One Last Stop by Cassie McQuiston. I really enjoyed this. I wasn't really sure about it because I don't read a whole lot of genre romance, and it was really hyped, so I was a little bit concerned that maybe it wasn't going to be as good, But I really loved it. If you've somehow been living under a rock, One Last Stop is about a girl named August who falls in love with a girl who is stuck in time on a train. So overall, I really liked this. I loved the characters. I would absolutely marry Jane Sue. I really liked the friends. I liked their characters, but really I liked the fact that they play a pretty central role in the plot. So there's a lot in here on friendship, as well as the the mystery and romance aspect. So that was really cool. Overall, I really loved how Cassie McQuiston was able to balance the realistic kind of emotions with the kind of lightness that's required for genre romance. She didn't, ignore any pieces of it. Like, August was definitely dealing with some stuff. There was a bit with her mom. Her mom is, like, obsessed with finding her missing brother and has been, and has put August in some really questionable situations because of that. I will say that I think that the choice to tell this from August's perspective was really good, just because, I mean, some parts of, like, the mystery and whatever, it wouldn't have worked in, like, a third-person omniscient, but also having more of a look into Jane's perspective, I think it would have been a lot harder to keep light. But I really love how gay history is incorporated in here. I can't say too much because it is connected to a major plot point, the specific thing that I'm thinking of, but there is a particular historical event that is pivotal, and I love that they included that. I will say I also actually liked the smut in this book, which was surprising, because I tend to skim smut more often than not. I've read just way too much fan fiction, so I've seen my fair share of smut, and granted, I haven't read a ton of genre romance, but I've seen enough, just in general. But the way that Casey McQuiston writes it is not as like biologically detailed. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it's like they don't like describe in detail like what people's genitals are doing, and I think that's what like squicks me out. They talk about like people's feelings in the situation and like what is happening. And it's very good. It's very good. Despite the fact that they're not talking about people's body parts. This was good. It was a very good book. I had lots of warm feelings, stayed up until 2 a.m. reading it. It was a good time. So far as books that I worked on reading, I've been flipping through a couple of tarot books that were available on Libby. No, not Libby, the other one, Hoopla. Though I haven't read them like end to end or anything like that, but I just thought I would mention them. But the main thing that I've really been working on, I started for Tome Topple, and that is Let the Record Show by Sarah Schulman. You can see how chunky that is. I have been having a really good time with this one. That sounds like such a weird thing to say because it's about a really depressing thing. It is very good so far. I'm not super far into it, but this book is about ACT UP, which was one of the most well-known AIDS organization that was direct action oriented. They started it in 1987, and she's going through these interviews that she did with people who are a part of it. I think her and Jim Hubbard ended up getting a lot of this data. She's basically putting together like what exactly happened, like what was the trajectory of ACT UP, and she herself was a part of it, and that's, she talks about that in the intro and stuff like that. And it's going through and talking about different people's roles within the organization, and the fact that, this is often posited as a piece of gay male history. However, women and people of color were central to the group. So she's talking about like the complexities of all that and everything. If you want to know more about this, and even like some at least of the angle that she's coming from and everything like that, obviously not the whole thing because there's a lot there and I haven't read it yet, so I don't know what all she's added. But if you're interested in ACT UP, I highly recommend United in Anger, which is free. It's on YouTube. I'll put a link. There is one more book, actually. I started Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. I'm not totally through with it yet because I've mostly been reading it at work on my break. So I've been reading it in bits and pieces. It's really interesting so far. I do have some critiques. And I've recently heard little bits and pieces of other people's critiques, which are interesting. So I really want to read the rest of this, which will hopefully happen sooner rather than later, unless I just continue to read this at work. Then it will probably take another, like, week shy of a month, if I go at the same pace. Hopefully it will not take me that long to finish this tiny-ass book. But I think that is all that I read. I don't think that I mentioned the Sarah Schulman book and Be Me Free were definitely a part of ReadoRama. I am all over the place. This was a lot better the first time that I shot it, when my phone was not listening to me, like 2 hours ago at this point, or an hour. I don't know how time works. I went to charge my phone so that I wouldn't have this problem, but then I ended up making TikToks, and you know how it goes, or maybe you don't. I don't know. I don't know you. So, this was October. If any of you have read any of these books, definitely let me know about them in the comments below. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.